This podcast was produced using artificial intelligence and refined by human editors.
Hey there, Globetrotters, and welcome back to another episode of Travel with Lara and Luca. I'm Luca, your wanderlust-driven companion, and as always, I'm joined by the ever-so-curious and brilliant Lara.
Thank you for that introduction, Luca. Hello, dear listeners. I'm Lara, and I'm thrilled to embark on yet another voyage with you all. Today's podcast is whisking us away to the vibrant, bustling, and absolutely unforgettable city of Hong Kong.
Ah, Hong Kong. An incredible juxtaposition of ancient traditions and skyscraping modernity, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, Luca. It's a city where you can find serene temples just a stone's throw away from neon-lit shopping districts.
That's Hong Kong for you, full of surprises at every corner. And speaking of surprises, in today's episode, we're diving headfirst into the myriad of sights and flavors that make Hong Kong one of the world's most exciting cities.
We'll touch on everything from its jaw-dropping skyline to its delectable dim sum. But before we get into all that, Luca, tell me, do you remember stepping out of the airport for the first time?
Indeed I do. It was like a wall of energy hit me. The sounds from the bustling markets, the variety of aromas wafting through the air, and the sheer speed of life whooshing past. How about your first Hong Kong experience, Lara?
Well, it was the symphony of city lights for me, that glittering skyline encased by the night sky. It was poetic, almost as if the stars had decided to take a vacation on Earth.
That's a beautiful image, Lara. And speaking of vacation, it's our job to make sure our listeners feel prepped and pumped for their own Hong Kong getaway, isn't it?
Without a doubt. And with that said, let's not delay any longer. We'll start our Hong Kong adventure with the iconic sights you just can't miss, from the dizzying heights of Victoria Peak to the iconic Star Ferry plying its trade in Victoria Harbour.
Things are about to get peak entertaining, Lara. But first, a quick reminder to our listeners. Hong Kong has a way of wrapping its history around every experience, doesn't it?
That's for sure. Even the tram that takes you up to the peak is over a century old. And when you get to the top, the panorama is just, well, it takes your breath away.
Which might be why you thought it was a good idea to race me to the top that one time, remember? Though you might have forgotten that the tram is quite a bit faster than us humans.
Oh, I remember. All right. I remember you huffing and puffing and me snapping photos of your defeated face when I got there first.
If only there was photographic evidence to back up that claim. But folks, stories like that are just a taste of what's to come.
Stick around, because after the break, we're diving straight into the heart of Hong Kong with our iconic sights segment. From the top of the peak to the tranquil Chi Lin Nunnery, get ready for a whirlwind tour of the city's must-see destinations.
And trust me, we have stories for days about these places, including the one where Lara tried to mimic Bruce Lee's statue pose and almost took a swim in Victoria Harbour.
Hey, now let's save those tales for the segment, shall we? We wouldn't want to give it all away just yet.
Fair enough, fair enough. So dear listeners, hold on to your seats, grab your imaginary passports, and get ready for a journey through the iconic sights of Hong Kong.
You're listening to Travel with Lara and Luca, and we're just getting started. Stay tuned for an episode filled with unbelievable vistas, rich history, and endless charm.
Up next, the iconic sights of Hong Kong, right after this. All right, travelers, buckle up, because we're about to take you through the iconic sights of Hong Kong, where the views are as steep as the property prices.
And if you thought New York never sleeps, wait till you meet our city that truly works the night shift. First stop, the Peak. There's no way you go to Hong Kong and skip the view from Victoria Peak, right, Luca?
Not unless you're a fan of missing out on pure beauty. Up there, you get more than a bird's eye view. It's like being in a helicopter without the noise.
I remember coming up the Peak tram during my first trip, that steep climb where the buildings start looking like they're leaning back to avoid the incline. Did you ever have that feeling?
Oh yes, that's the Peak tram illusion. They seem to bend due to the angled ascent. Fun fact, it's one of the world's oldest and most famous funicular railways.
He's not wrong, folks. But Luca, tell them about that time we went up and it was so foggy we couldn't see a thing.
Now that was a day. Picture this, we're excited, we're climbing, reaching the top only to be enveloped in what seemed like a cotton factory explosion.
I was so disappointed, but then, out of nowhere, the fog lifted.
And there it was, the view we'd been waiting for. Like the curtain rising on the world's most natural theater. And because of the fog, the place wasn't crowded, so we got the balcony to ourselves.
Karma's way of rewarding our patience. But you know, even when we aren't hanging in the clouds at the peak, there's the Star Ferry to give us that water-level vista of both sides of Victoria Harbour.
Ah, the Star Ferry, my granddad's favorite. He says that ferry has more history than most of the buildings around it. Been carrying passengers since the 1880s.
It's one of my favorite things, feeling the breeze on your face watching the skyline fly past. It's not just transport, it's an event.
You get those old wood benches, the engine chugging away, and for less than a cup of coffee, you're delivered from the glass and steel of Central to the neon buzz of Tsim Sha Tsui.
Speaking of Tsim Sha Tsui, everyone has to take that stroll along the Avenue of Stars. Remember when we tried to do those kung fu poses next to Bruce Lee's statue?
How could I forget? Lara trying to do the 1-inch punch and almost falling into the harbor.
Hey now, but our listeners should definitely try it. Feel the spirit of Hong Kong cinema. Emulate the stars, or just laugh at your friends' attempts, like Luca did with mine.
Absolutely, it's a must. Oh, and at night, that's where you catch the Symphony of Lights show across the buildings of the harbor. They pull all the stops with lasers, searchlights, LEDs.
Imagine the city breakdancing to classical music. Now, Luca, for those wanting to follow in our intrepid footsteps, the Peak and Avenue of Stars are given, but what's your one wildcard sight that they should see?
Have to go with the old lady herself, the clock tower down by the waterfront in Kowloon. It's like this colonial slice of time, standing defiant while the world races by in hyperspeed.
And for our listeners who love a spot of historical whimsy, the clock tower is a piece of the old Kowloon-Canton railway station, preserved for us to ponder time while time itself rushes on.
So there you have it, folks, the iconic sights of Hong Kong. From high above at the Peak to the waterfront memories at the Avenue of Stars and the clock tower. You'll find stories and views that stitch the fabric of this city together.
But the beauty of Hong Kong isn't just in its sights, it's in the flavors waiting to enchant your taste buds. Stay tuned because after this short break, we'll dive into the delicious cuisine that makes Hong Kong a sizzling hot pot of culinary adventure. Welcome back to Travel with Lara and Luca, where we're indulging in one of our favorite subjects, Hong Kong's delicious cuisine.
Oh, the food, Lara. How many trips to Hong Kong would one need just to scratch the surface of this culinary capital?
At least a dozen, Luca, but each visit you've got to start with dim sum. Hong Kong's hard on a plate. What's your must-have in a dim sum feast?
It's a tough call, but I always look for siu mai. These delectable little dumplings stuffed with shrimp or pork and mushrooms never disappoint. What's yours, Lara?
I'm all about the har gow, those tender shrimp-filled translucent dumplings. Divine. And, yum cha having tea with dim sum, such a jovial affair.
Oh, speaking of tea, I adore the way Hong Kongers elevate the simple act of drinking tea into this lively communal event.
Absolutely. It's like the whole table comes alive, reaching over one another, chatting away, and savoring each bite.
That's the magic, isn't it? Now, if we step outside the tea house onto the streets, the aroma alone can guide you to some of the best food stalls in the world.
Let's not even get started on street food because we might never stop. From egg tarts with their flaky crust to curry fish balls. Luca, have you ever had a better skewer?
Never. And every time I think I've found my favorite Dai Pai Dong, a street food stall to the uninitiated, I turn a corner and find a new treasure.
Audience, if you want to know what the locals cherish, look for the stall with the longest queue. That's where you'll find gems like stinky tofu. It's an acquired taste, but worth it.
Stinky tofu is Hong Kong's dare food. You've got to be brave, but the payoff? It's surprisingly delicious with that crispy crust and soft center.
And while we're chatting street eats, let's not forget about the sweet treats. Egg waffles, anyone? I dream about their crispy edges and soft, eggy pockets.
Remember to devour them while they're hot for the full experience. Now, outing myself as a sucker for fine dining, Lara, when was the last time you treated yourself to Hong Kong's Michelin star dining scene?
Oh, the last visit. There's something about Cantonese cuisine taken to that artistic level. The innovation, the precision of flavors. What a ride for your taste buds.
For me, it's those delicate dim sum items, reimagined by culinary wizards. They create these masterpieces that look too good to eat, but we eat them anyway.
Yet they manage to preserve that essential Hong Kong character, don't they? It's the past and future served on a single plate.
Ah, and when we're talking character and cuisine, Lara, I can't help but think of the local institutions that dish out roast meats. The char siu, the roast duck. It's their glossy lacquer that wins me over every time.
Luca, you're making me hungry all over again. But let's not forget about congee, a simple rice porridge that is anything but plain with all the possible toppings.
That's Hong Kong for you, elevating the simple things to art.
And while we're feeling elevated, have you tried those pudding-like desserts made with almond or black sesame? Soft, sweet, and frankly, I'm a bit obsessed.
You and your sweet tooth, Lara. But I must admit, nothing rounds off a meal quite like those little bowls of heaven.
We've covered a lot of ground, Luca, from the bustling tea houses to the glitzy heights of gourmet dining.
We sure have, Lara. And that's just brushing the crumbs off the surface.
As we wrap up this segment, it's good to note that your culinary journey in Hong Kong can be as wild and varied as you dare it to be.
And speaking of wild and varied, in our next segment, we promise to explore Hong Kong's hidden gems, places even some locals are yet to discover.
Stay tuned as we unearth the secret spots that give this city its true flavor. Welcome back to Travel with Lara and Luca. Hope you've been loving our whirlwind tour of Hong Kong. Now it's time to unearth some of the city's hidden gems, isn't it, Luca?
Absolutely, Lara. There's a treasure trove of lesser-known spots that we're just itching to share. Starting with one of my favorites, the Ap Liu Street Market in Sham Shui Po. It's like Aladdin's cave of electronics and trinkets, don't you think?
Spot on, Luca. It's a tinkerer's delight. Nowhere else can you find a vintage radio, a set of screwdrivers, and a vinyl record of Cantonese opera under one roof. My favorite find was an old-fashioned typewriter that now sits like a queen on my desk.
A queen, eh? A fitting purchase from a market that's ruled the streets since the 50s. Moving on, remember that day we stumbled upon Turtle Cove Beach?
Oh, I could never forget. We took the wrong bus, wandered down a mysterious path filled with butterflies, and then, out of nowhere, this serene patch of sand. Turtle Cove Beach is the perfect escape from the city's buzz.
Right. And what about the turtles? Sort of a misnomer, as I've yet to spot one of those Shelly buddies there.
Well, it's the thought that counts. Next up on our Mystic Tour is the Hong Kong Museum of Medical Sciences. Bet you didn't see that one coming, listeners?
Indeed, it's one of those quirky museums you'd probably walk past without a second glance. But inside, a fascinating look into traditional Chinese medicine and the battle against historic epidemics.
Yes, I found the old apothecary jars particularly captivating. And remember, Luca, how you got spooked by that antique dentist's chair?
Ha! That relic could have been straight out of a horror film. But speaking of spooks, how about that time we visited the 10,000 Buddhas monastery? Doesn't sound very hidden, but it's surprisingly off the radar for many tourists.
True, nestled in the quiet hills away from the clamor of Shatin. I'll never forget the golden statues lining our path, each Buddha with a different pose and expression.
We could have been walking amongst an army of smiling, serene generals. Something I love about Hong Kong is how you can be in a bustling district one minute and then, with just a short hike, find yourself in a place like that. Almost otherworldly.
Absolutely. It's a city of delightful contrasts. Not many know about the Rainbow Village either. Tell them about that unique spot, Luca.
Ah, the Rainbow Village, or as I like to call it, Hong Kong's own kaleidoscope. It's an old residential area turned into a vibrant canvas of colors. Each wall tells a story with its bright murals and street art.
Makes you feel like you're walking in a living painting. We met that lovely elderly couple, remember? They offered us jasmine tea and told us how the art has brought new life to their community.
How could I forget? They were just as colorful as the surroundings. Then there's Peng Chau Island, To think such tranquility exists a stone's throw from the skyscrapers.
That tiny island is a gem. One can spend hours exploring the little alleys, the sleepy beaches, and the old matchstick factory turned heritage trail.
Yep, a throwback to a bygone era where the pace is slow and the air is tinged with salt and nostalgia.
And before we let our listeners go, let's not forget about Le Yumun. It's a seafood paradise, complete with traditional fishing village vibes.
Those salt and pepper squid dishes we had, nothing short of sublime. It's the authenticity of the place that really draws you in.
I still have dreams about that seafood feast. But all good things must come to a pause as we've got to wrap up this Hidden Gems tour. Next up, we're diving into some of the must-see places you simply can't miss while visiting Hong Kong. Right, Luca?
We certainly are, Lara. Looking forward to shining the spotlight on the unforgettable sights that make Hong Kong the dazzling city it is.
So stay tuned, dear travelers, as we unveil the magnificence of Hong Kong's unmissable treasures. Here we are in the heart of adventure and the soul of tradition. Welcome back, travelers, to Travel with Lara and Luca. In this segment, we're sharing the must-see places of Hong Kong, the spots that postcards dream about. Ready to dive in, Luca?
Born ready, Lara. And where else to start but the sanctified trails leading up to Lantau Island's majestic Big Buddha? The journey there is a pilgrimage in itself, don't you think?
Absolutely. I remember the first time I caught sight of the Tiantan Buddha sitting there, all 34 meters of bronze serenity. The climb up those 268 steps is almost a rite of passage in Hong Kong travel.
And you really can't help but feel humbled. The Po Lin Monastery nearby just adds to that feeling of tranquility. Remember that delicious vegetarian meal we had there?
Oh, those were some divine mushrooms. Not your typical tourist fare, and what a welcome respite from the usual buzzing city life. Now, if we jump from the serene to the vibrant, Luca, what's next on our must-see list?
It's got to be Kwai Fong and Soho, the beating heart of Hong Kong's nightlife, the crossroads of culture and revelry. But it's not just about the party, is it, Lara?
Not at all. By day, art galleries and cute boutique shops have their doors wide open. You'll find international cuisine that will take your taste buds on as much of a journey as your passport.
Speaking of journeys, remember that time we stumbled into that jazz bar and you...
Now, Luca. What happens in Kwai Fong stays in Kwai Fong. But I'll admit, it's a story for the ages, and those spontaneous finds really are the jewels of travel.
They are indeed. Now, we can't talk about must-see Hong Kong without mentioning Monmo Temple. It's like stepping into a different era, right there on Hollywood Road.
Incense coils burning overhead, casting a smoke-veiled charm over the temple. It's dedicated to the gods of literature, man and war, Mo. It's a photographer's dream, but put the camera away for a moment and just absorb the atmosphere. It's a cultural touchstone in this fast-paced city.
And it's the contrasts in Hong Kong that mesmerize me, Lara. How you can go from this ancient temple to, say, the futuristic Hong Kong Science Park without skipping a beat.
Transit magic, Luca. Speaking of which, wouldn't you say that Hong Kong is a city best experienced on foot?
For sure. Winding your way through the streets, you bounce from era to era, influence to influence. It's a tapestry of the historic and the cutting edge, the well-trodden and the offbeat.
That's Hong Kong in a nutshell for me. Diversity. And in the scope of diversity, a gem always worth mentioning is the Harbour's nightly symphony of lights. Perhaps the most literal highlight of a trip here.
Touristy? Maybe. But there's a magic to it, especially on a clear night when the lasers paint the skyline and you realize just how much this city loves to show off.
A love that we share, Luca. We're pretty partial to a bit of showing off too when it comes to these must-see places. But even with all this talk of the spectacular, we can't forget those quiet moments, right?
Absolutely. It's in those silent seconds, overlooking the South China Sea maybe, just as the sun sets, that the heartbeat of Hong Kong really becomes clear.
And it's a heartbeat that echoes through the city's piazzas, its peak, and its ports. To travel here is to ride on the pulse of a place both proudly Chinese and uniquely cosmopolitan.
Couldn't have put it better myself, Lara. But our voyage through this episode is far from over. Coming up next is a segment dedicated to the weird, the wonderful, and the I can't believe this is true facts of Hong Kong. You won't want to miss it.
So stick with us as we delve into the dragons, the architectural quirks, perhaps even the supernatural side of this city. Hong Kong's quirkiest secrets are up next, right after this.
And now we tiptoe into the peculiar, the unique, the downright weird facts of Hong Kong.
Oh, I'm so ready for this, Luca. It's like opening a treasure chest of oddities.
First up, did you ever look up at the buildings in Hong Kong and think, what in the world?
All the time. Remember the one with a hole in the middle? Turns out it's not a quirky design choice, but feng shui.
Absolutely, it's the Repulse Bay building with this giant square hole, right? The idea is that dragons from the hills can fly through them to the water.
Gotta keep those dragons happy, Luca, or no good luck for you. And speaking of feng shui, businesses spend a fortune on it.
They even hire feng shui masters before they start construction. Imagine your job being to tell a skyscraper where to go.
And I heard that the HSBC building's escalators were positioned to combat bad energy from rival banks.
So much drama in high finance, even the buildings are in on it. But speaking of escalators, what about the central mid-levels escalator?
Oh, let me tell you, it's like a stairway to heaven, or more like a moving sidewalk to the sky. It's the world's longest outdoor covered escalator system.
Talk about a commute with a view. And remember that time it started moving in the opposite direction while we were on it?
A morning to remember. I never walked downstairs so fast in my life. Good thing we didn't spill our coffees.
Now, weird fact about animals. Every year there's a festival where people appease hungry ghosts, and they do it with, wait for it, paper offerings.
You're talking about the Hungry Ghost Festival. They burn paper money, cars, iPhones even, all to keep those spirits from getting too spirited.
Digital afterlife needs, Lara? Spirits with smartphones. I love our modern world.
How about that time we stumbled upon that cricket fighting match?
I still can't believe that's a thing. People raising crickets like prized boxers.
But it's all part of the rich tapestry that makes Hong Kong such a fascinating place, from high-flying dragons to fighting crickets.
Weird doesn't even begin to cover it, but we must march onwards. Our next segment will dive into the depths of Hong Kong's history.
Bet there won't be a dull moment with us time traveling.
Dusting off the history books, are we? Welcome back, fellow time travelers, to Travel with Lara and Luca, where we are about to embark on a journey through the rich and textured history of Hong Kong.
That's right, Luca, and it's a history that grips you with its tales of empires, wars, and transformations. Let's take our listeners back to where it all began.
A jump into the past it is. Long before it became the neon-lit metropolis we know today, Hong Island was a quiet place with just a few fishing villages and incense factories.
To think such humble beginnings. But then, in the 19th century, along came the British after the First Opium War and the Treaty of Nanking. That little island and then Kowloon were ceded to Britain, forever changing its destiny.
Absolutely, Lara. The British quickly recognized Hong Kong's potential as a trading port, and so began the flow of goods, people, and, well, tea. Lots of tea.
Fancy a cuppa, Luca? Because it's not just the tea that stuck around. The British left their mark with law, language, and even left-hand driving.
Yes, they drove culture forward in their own way. But remember, while under colonial rule, Hong Kong evolved into a haven for entrepreneurs. The skyline started to sprout, shaped by those who came to seek their fortunes.
And fortunes they found. Let's not forget how Hong Kong became a manufacturing powerhouse post-World War II. Refugees from China brought skills and labor, pushing Hong Kong to reinvent itself yet again.
True resilience in face of adversity. But the history of Hong Kong isn't just a story of industry and innovation. There were darker times, particularly during World War II.
That's an important chapter. The Japanese occupation brought hardship and turmoil, but Hong Kong's spirit, unshaken. It stood firm and bounced back after the war, rebuilding and growing even more rapidly.
And then came the 80s. With the end of the 99-year lease approaching, the discussions of Hong Kong's future began. Handover talks between Britain and China started the clock ticking on a new era.
Ah, the infamous Handover of 1997, a dramatic and emotionally charged moment watched by the whole world. Hong Kong was returned to China under the principle of one country, two systems.
And what a spectacle that was, Lara. An end of an epoch and the start of another. Since then, Hong Kong has maintained its distinctiveness, operating with its own legal system and economic principles.
It's this rich tapestry of history that makes Hong Kong such a fascinating place to explore. Remnants of its past stand side by side with symbols of its future.
Indeed, Lara. You can walk through streets named after British governors, past temples older than the city's British story, and all the while be shadowed by some of the tallest skyscrapers in the world.
Such contrast, Luca. The modernity, the history, they all intertwine here, like the roots of the old banyan trees wrapping around the concrete.
Poetic as always, Lara. And speaking of trees, next up, we'll wander out of the urban jungle and into the unexpected greenery. We'll give you some expert travel tips to make your Hong Kong adventure as smooth as silk.
How fitting, considering silk is another of Hong Kong's historical exports. But first, we must finish our historical tale. As we look at Hong Kong today, a special administrative region of China, we can still see the legacy of its unique journey. A truly international city, wouldn't you say?
I could not have put it better myself. Hong Kong stands as a testament to endurance, enterprise, and a capacity to adapt like no other. You feel it in the streets, in the monuments, and in the air.
And let's not forget the people who call this city home. Their stories are chapters of Hong Kong's history, written with hope, determination, and an undying spirit.
Here. And with that, dear listeners, we've reached the end of our historical voyage through Hong Kong. But our time together isn't over yet.
Indeed, it isn't. Stick with us as we share all our expert travel tips to help you plan the trip of a lifetime to this amazing city.
From packing essentials to navigating the maze of streets, stay tuned for the next segment, where we'll give you the insider's guide to Hong Kong. Welcome back to Travel with Lara and Luca, travelers. I hope you've got your notepads ready because we're about to dive into some expert travel tips for navigating the bustling streets and hidden alleys of Hong Kong.
Ah, the traveler's cheat sheet, my favorite. Let's kick things off with when exactly to pack your bags for Hong Kong. Planning is key, unless you enjoy being either a human popsicle or a walking sauna.
Spot on, Lara. Autumn is truly a little slice of heaven in Hong Kong, from late September to early December. You've got comfortable breezes and sunshine that won't have you melting in the streets.
And the winters are mild too. If you don't mind a little chill in the air, December to February is quite manageable. Plus, you get to see the city all decked out in festive lights. It's pure magic.
Absolutely. But if you're a fan of the heat and don't mind a bit of rain, summer could be your season. Just a heads up though, it's typhoon season from May to November, so check the weather forecasts.
It's all about that preparedness. Speaking of which, let's talk about getting around. Hong Kong may be compact, but boy does it have layers. Octopus cards are your key to the public transport kingdom.
Indispensable, those cards. Load them up and swipe away on the MTR, buses, and even ferries. It's efficient and won't make your wallet weep.
And don't fear the MTR. It's the vein that runs through the city. Quick, clean, and the stations are so well signposted, you'd have to try pretty hard to get lost.
But if you do, it's an adventure, right? Oh, and the ferries. Can we talk about the Star Ferry for a minute? Not just a way to cross the harbor, it's a genuine piece of Hong Kong history, and the views are unbeatable.
Now, for anyone renting a car, just don't. Seriously, unless you've got nerves of steel and a zen-like patience, the city's not for the faint-hearted driver. Traffic is dense, parking is a myth, and the public transport options are just too good.
Haha, parking is a myth. I'm stealing that one. Walking can be your best friend here too. Get a good map and explore the nooks and crannies on foot. That's how you'll find the real treasures.
Exactly. And when you're out there walking, remember Hong Kongers' value order. Stay to the right on escalators so that people can pass on the left. It's a small thing, but it keeps the city flowing smoothly.
Manners maketh the traveler. What about tipping, Lara? It can be a bit of a cultural landmine in some places.
Here it's pretty straightforward. Tipping isn't a big tradition in Hong Kong. Restaurants might add a 10% service charge, but if there's none, leaving change or rounding up the bill is plenty.
And if you're venturing into the realm of taxis, which are plentiful and pretty affordable, most drivers don't expect tips. Just round up to the nearest dollar, and they'll be more than happy.
Another tip: always carry cash for smaller establishments and markets. Hong Kong loves its digital payments, but there's still an old-school charm for the crispy bill.
Also, keep your eyes peeled for Wi-Fi. Hong Kong is pretty generous with it, so you can stay connected and show off your travels in real time without any staggering roaming fees.
True. Come prepared with a VPN, though if you have particular sites you can't live without. Dodging digital hiccups is always a win.
As for language, most signs are in English and Cantonese, but it wouldn't hurt to learn a few basic Cantonese phrases.
Locals appreciate the effort. A simple mgoy for please or thanks can go a long way.
Also, patience is a virtue here in Hong Kong. Respect the local customs. Queuing is sacred, no pushing or skipping, or you'll feel the sting of disapproving glares.
A final nugget of wisdom: be ready to switch up your plans on the go. Hong Kong has a rhythm all its own, and sometimes it's best to just flow with it.
That's Hong Kong in a nutshell. Plan, but be prepared to improvise. Adventures await around every corner. Next up, we're heading out of the city's heart and into the wilder side with some captivating side excursions. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Welcome back, Globetrotters. You're traveling with Lara and me, Luca, and we're still weaving through the wonders of Hong Kong. But now, let's talk side excursions.
That's right. Sometimes the heart of a city shines brightest in the places that lie just beyond its borders. So, Luca, ever felt the lure of Macau's Portuguese flair?
Lara, I've been seduced by it. Just an hour away by ferry, Macau is like stepping into a European enclave with an Asian twist. The ruins of St. Paul's, for starters. What a sight!
I know. I found myself whispering sweet nothings to those historic stones. The melding of cultures there is like an artist went wild with their palette, don't you think?
A painter and a chef. From the streets of Taipa Village to the Michelin-starred temples of taste, Macau is a gustatory delight. That Macanese cuisine is something else.
Oh, those African chicken flavors still dance on my tongue. It's like the whole city is in a perpetual masquerade, European masks on Asian faces.
And let's not forget the gambling, Asia's Vegas. I dropped a few coins into a slot, but my real jackpot was exploring the city's colonial past, a real-life time machine.
Yes, and away from the glitz, the temples there breathe such tranquility. Ama Temple, for instance, an homage to the sea goddess after whom Macau is named.
From divine guardians to natural marvels, have you ventured to the Hong Kong Geopark, Lara?
Have I? Those hexagonal rock columns rising from the sea, it's like Mother Nature's own sculpture garden.
It's the earth telling its timeless tale. You walk through the Geopark, and you're stepping across pages of natural history, each rock formation a different chapter.
It is serene, isn't it? I remember sitting on a cliff, the sea breeze ruffling my hair, and thinking how wild it is that such a serene place is only a stone's throw from the city's hustle.
Definitely wild. And speaking of wild, let's wander to the new territories. Those hiking trails, don't get me started on the beauty.
But I'm going to. The new territories, it's like you've uncovered Hong Kong's secret garden. The lush greenery, the chorus of birds, it's harmonic.
I still hear the crunch of leaves underfoot from my hike to Tai Mo Shan. At the summit, you're above the clouds, caught in a tete-a-tete with the sky.
And I'm always enchanted by nature's contrasts. Hiking in the new territories, one moment you're under a canopy of green, and the next you're looking at a skyline that defies gravity.
Hong Kong teaches us the art of balance, doesn't it? Between leaps of modernity and steps of tradition, between skyscrapers and the soil of the earth.
Speaking of tradition, remember Hong Kong's own wild, less trodden path? The Dragon's Back?
Oh, Lara, that trail is a dragon I'd ride any day. The views of Sheko, the winding paths, it's a trekker's dragon dream.
You're soaring up there. The vista's making you feel part dragon yourself. And when you descend from those heights, Big Wave Bay awaits with a refreshing embrace.
Surf's up. Now that we've trodden through excursions beyond Hong Kong's heart, I'm feeling the pull of my traveler's compass.
As am I, Luca. We've painted images of Macau, marveled at rock sculptures, and danced with dragons. always, with Hong Kong as our vibrant backdrop.
Next up, we'll be closing our travelogue with that bittersweet moment, the conclusion, and our final thoughts. Stay with us because we'll be recapping our favorite highlights and sharing some heartfelt reflections.
After all, every great journey, even in podcast form, must have a poignant end. But fear not, we'll also offer a glimpse into our next thrilling adventure.
So stay tuned, dear listeners, as we wrap up this episode of Travel with Lara and Luca. And just like the symphony of lights over Victoria Harbour, another episode of Travel with Lara and Luca comes to a brilliant close. Today, we've taken you through the electrifying streets of Hong Kong.
We've explored everything from the sky-kissing views of the Peak to the serene sands of hidden beaches. Honestly, Luca, picking a standout moment feels like trying to choose the best dumpling at a dim sum feast. Impossible.
Oh, Lara, tell me about it. I think I'll always have a soft spot for the tale we shared about the Star Ferry. There is just something timeless about crossing those waters. What about you?
For me, the history segment was particularly eye-opening, digging into the heart and soul of Hong Kong, exploring its colonial era, and witnessing its incredible resilience. The city is a storybook that everyone should read.
Well put, Lara. Looking back, I'm also really glad we dived into those unusual customs during the Weird Facts segment. I mean, who knew that a building design could be all about Feng Shui?
Absolutely. And let's not forget the travel tips we dished out. I'm imagining our listeners now all set to navigate the busy streets of Hong Kong thanks to our insider hacks.
True. They'll be weaving through markets and hopping onto double-decker trams like pros. By the way, which hidden gem do you think our listeners will race to first?
It's got to be the quirky museums. Those are the kind of treasures you love to stumble upon yourself.
Ah, indeed. Speaking of treasures, our day trip suggestions to Macau and the Geopark were like jewels on a crown. Those side excursions provide such a wonderful contrast to the city's hustle and bustle.
They're the perfect way to cap off a Hong Kong adventure, aren't they? And then there's the cuisine. Luca, I'm still dreaming of that perfect egg tart we had at that Michelin-starred spot.
The cuisine. How could I forget? That's the flavor of Hong Kong we carried with us on this journey. We dipped into dim sum, ventured through vibrant street food, and even indulged in the fine dining scene.
It's been quite the expedition, hasn't it? And as we say our fond farewells, I'm already excited for our listeners to venture out and create their own Hong Kong stories.
As am I. Dear listeners, whether you're a seasoned traveler or dreaming up your first big trip, Hong Kong is a city that welcomes you with open arms and an endless array of discoveries.
So until next time, keep your curiosity alive, your passport handy, and take a little piece of Travel with Lara and Luca with you on your journeys.
Make sure to tune in for the next episode, where we will whisk you away to a land of ancient ruins, bustling bazaars, and a magical blend of culture. Any guesses?
Oh, let them simmer in anticipation, Luca. We're off to the enchanting region of Cappadocia, where fairy chimneys and hot air balloons await. Join us as we explore the wonders of Turkey.
Ah, a teaser as delightful as Turkish delight itself. Lara, as always, it has been an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure was mine, Luca. And for all of you out there, stoked for Cappadocia, remember, adventure is just a conversation away.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, and see you in the next episode of Travel with Lara and Luca.